What is your occupation?
I am an associate state medical examiner at the Iowa office of the state medical examiner.
How long have you held that position?
Approximately 6 years.
You're currently employed there, I presume, at the state?
Yes.
And you've been there for 6 years?
Yes.
How long have you been a physician?
I've been a physician since 2013.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 25. Could you tell me what that document is?
This is a copy of my CV or my resume.
Is that a true and accurate reflection of your educational and work history?
Yes, it is.
I move to admit Exhibit 25.
Any objection? No objection. 25 is admitted.
Could you explain to the jury briefly just what it is you do in your job?
So I'm a board certified forensic pathologist, so I'm trained to perform autopsies. Those are examinations on deceased individuals, primarily to determine the cause of death, so what led for them to die, whether it be a natural disease or an injury, and then I determine manner of death, which describes the circumstances surrounding someone's passing. I perform autopsies, then write autopsy reports, I interpret toxicology findings, I read medical records, I teach medical students, I provide expert testimony, and do other things within my office, but those are my primary duties.
Thank you. On or about January 19th of this year, did you perform an autopsy on Jennifer Dazy?
Yes, I did.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 26. Is that your report of autopsy?
Yes, it is.
I would move to admit Exhibit 26.
Any objection?
No objection.
26 is admitted.
May I approach again?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been marked Exhibit 26A. Are those photos or some of the photos that are part of your report?
Yes.
Did you select certain photos that you believe would be helpful in describing the injuries and your conclusions?
Yes, I did.
And that's what's contained in that exhibit?
Yes.
Move to admit Exhibit 26A.
Any objection?
No objection.
26A is admitted.
So let's look at your autopsy report. And on page 1, you have pathologic diagnoses. Is that sort of a table of contents to the rest of your report?
Yes, it is.
And it's a list of findings from your autopsy?
Yes, it's a summary of all of my findings, which includes the cause of death and any additional findings.
And then you elaborate as your report goes on, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in Exhibit 26A, that group of photos, is that something that helps you in describing your findings in the report?
Yes.
So let's start with your pathologic diagnosis number 1. And at any time when we go through and you're explaining this, if you would like a photo put up, let us know which one and we can put that up.
Okay.
So on pathologic diagnosis number 1, could you explain what that means?
So the first diagnosis is my cause of death. The cause of death in this case was multiple sharp force injuries. Underneath that 1, I have an A, a B, and a C, where I group sharp force injuries in terms of location on the body. There were 3 main locations that had sharp force injuries: the head, the neck, and the left hand.
So under A, does that separate out those injuries to the head?
Yes, A describes the injuries to the head. There were a total of 13 sharp force injuries. There were cutting wounds and chopping wounds to the head.
And then under B?
Under B, there were injuries to the neck, a total of 2 chopping wounds to the neck. And then C lists another 2 chopping wounds, this time to the left hand.
And then under Roman numeral 2, additional injuries?
For additional injuries, in addition to the sharp force injuries, there were blunt force injuries. So injuries due to the body coming into contact with something with a flat surface. There was a contusion or a bruise on the back of the left forearm and some bleeding under the scalp on the left side of the head.
That would be the subgaleal hemorrhage?
Yes.
Then we've got Roman numeral 3 through 6. Do those relate to your cause of death finding?
No, as part of these diagnoses, I'll list natural diseases that I find. Even though someone may have obvious injury, I may know exactly why they die, I still perform a full autopsy and document all of my findings. So they're essentially incidental natural findings.
Okay, so let's go back to your evidence of injury. And we start out with the head wounds. Would you like a photograph there?
Yes. In terms of organization, I listed the head wounds first. I start on the right side of the head, then the left side of the head, move from top to bottom. So the first injuries listed are seen in picture number 4.
That's one. May we publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
So this photo is looking at the right side of the upper forehead. Here there are a total of 3 chopping wounds. The largest has a squared appearance. It created a skin flap with the skin can be reflected upward. And on the lateral aspect of the head, when looking at the photo, it's on your left. There are 2 additional chopping wounds at the border of that larger chopping wound. That wound injured the skin and any soft tissue underneath the skin, and then it injured the frontal bone underneath it.
Did that particular wound penetrate the skull?
No, it only injured the outer surface of the skull.
All right. Where do you want to go from there?
The next wound that's listed is on the right side of the face, and that's seen in photo number 5. This is showing the right side of Miss Dazy's face, and there's a chopping wound on the right cheek. This chopping wound injured the skin, the soft tissue of the right cheek, and then the right side of the mandible or the jawbone.
What was the depth of that wound?
The depth of that wound was 1 5/8 inches.
Okay, what would be next?
The next wounds all were on the left side of the head, and these can be seen in photo 6.
Could you describe what your findings are there?
Here we have the top 2 larger wounds are chopping wounds. Both injured the skin, the soft tissue underneath the skin, the skull, the dura, which is a thin layer of tissue that covers the brain, and then the brain itself. That topmost chopping wound, within that wound is silver metal. That's from the decedent's previous brain surgery. The chopping wound actually fragmented that surgical material. Both resulted in fractures not only of the bone that was directly underneath the skin, but they resulted in fractures of the base of the skull. The topmost chopping wound injured part of the skull that's near the left eye, and then the lower one injured part of the skull that's near the ear canal. In between those 2 chopping wounds are 2 small cutting wounds. Cutting wounds just injured the superficial soft tissue or the skin. Below that second chopping wound is a small cutting wound on the face right in front of the left ear. Next, there were a total of, I was able to count with certainty 4 cutting wounds to the left ear. They were intersecting, but there were at least 4 cutting wounds to the left ear. And so those were all of the chopping and cutting wounds to the left side of the head.
I have left a laser pointer up there if you find that you want to point something out up here on the screen. As part of your explanation, feel free to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, so where should we move to next?
Next, I described the wounds to the neck, which are in photo 7. One of the wounds can be seen in this photo, and then this is just an extension. These are the cutting wounds of the neck, and then photo 7 shows both of them together, more on the back of the neck. So there were 2 chopping wounds to the left side of the neck, one more toward the front and one more toward the back. Those injured the soft tissue of the neck and then bones of the upper cervical spine. I did not appreciate any injury to the spinal cord itself, and those had a maximum depth of 2 inches.
What would be your next finding?
And then the next part of the body that had sharp force injury was the left hand. One of the injuries can be seen in photo 8. So this is looking at the left hand, the back of the left hand near the left thumb. Here is a curved chopping wound that created a skin flap that can be reflected upward. This injured the soft tissue of the hand and then a bone of the hand near the left thumb. Photo 9 shows the last chopping wound. This is the left hand again. So this is a chopping wound that injured 3 fingers, the index, the middle, and the ring fingers. The index finger has a pretty superficial wound by the fingernail. The middle finger was amputated as a result of the chopping wound, and the ring finger was nearly amputated as a result of the chopping wound. There's just some skin left that's connecting the finger to the hand. Injuries here included soft tissue and then bones of the fingers.
Are there any other findings that you think you need to touch on?
Those were all the sharp force injuries that I found, and then the additional blunt force injuries of the bruise of the left forearm and then some bleeding under the scalp. And those are the only injuries that I documented in my autopsy.
All right, just for a little housekeeping, I think I glossed over this, but the photo number 1. Could you describe what that is?
So when an individual is declared deceased and is going to be transported to my office for an autopsy, they're placed in a body bag, and that body bag is locked and labeled. So the blue lock there has a number on it that's documented at the scene and then documented in my autopsy report. That's important for maintaining chain of custody. And then the tag says who's in the body bag. A photograph here is taken to show that the body is received exactly as it was placed into the bag at the scene.
And that would be photo number 2, that photograph?
And then photo number 2 shows her exactly as she was received, with personal effects that include a pillow and 2 blankets.
And then photo number 3.
Photo number 3 is what we call an identification photo. Part of my job is also to confirm identity of the deceased individuals on whom I perform autopsies. We will compare them to their driver's license photos, other forms of visual ID, and then use surgical history and so on. So this is an example of an identification photo, which I compared to her driver's license photo. Her driver's license came with her to autopsy.
So once again, your cause of death was?
The cause of death was multiple sharp force injuries.
And specifically, can you identify any of those injuries that you believe were the fatal ones?
Really, you can die of any sort of sharp force injury or injury itself. In terms of the injuries that cause the most damage, especially damage to vital structures, those were the 2 chopping wounds on the left side of the head that injured the skull, the dura, the brain, and caused bleeding around the brain.
Thank you. May I approach?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been marked as Exhibit 14. Is that instrument consistent with the injuries that you viewed on Ms. Daisy?
Yes, this instrument could have caused those injuries that I documented.
And you can't say for certain as a physician that that is, but you can say it's certainly consistent with, is that right?
Correct.
And if you look at the blade of that instrument and the width, would it certainly be consistent with a blow from that instrument to take off the 2 inside fingers of a hand and injure the one but leave the other intact?
Yes.
The narrowness of the blade?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't have anything further. Can I ask one question, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
Kind of got ahead of myself.
Go ahead.
If Jennifer Dazey's blood and DNA were found on that instrument, would that increase the likelihood of that being the instrument of her death?
From an autopsy standpoint, it doesn't change anything, but from an investigative standpoint, that would make sense, yes.
Thank you. Now I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Likewise, if that instrument had been in her home for a significant period of time, where she had been living for a significant period of time, you wouldn't be at all surprised to find her DNA on it, would you?
Her DNA, I suppose, no.
Okay. Good morning, Doctor. And I apologize for, I asked the first question, and now I'm going to say good morning.
Good morning.
Were you able to develop any timeline regarding the injuries?
No.
And were you able to develop a time of death?
No. For the death certificate, when it says date and time of death, it's when she was found and pronounced dead.
Okay. So you're not able to actually tell when this occurred, are you?
No.
Under your manner of death, you indicated that the manner of death was homicide?
Yes.
Now, specifically, what does that mean to you?
Homicide is a medical determination. So unlike cause, where I have many different options, manner of death I only have 5, a homicide being one of them. And homicide to me, it means death at the hands of another.
Okay. So that's a medical determination, not a legal conclusion.
Correct.
All right. And there's a distinction between those two things, isn't there?
Yes.
You're not making any statement with regards to guilt or innocence or who did it or any of that, are you?
No, I am not.